The sun entered the chamber and started passing around whenever I sped it up. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But I thought, oh, the audio. What I didn't expect was on the audio, I could clearly hear the sounds of the pillars turning. The stone pillars that held up the roof were grinding in place. Now, I can tell you this. I was looking at the video. Nothing moved in that chamber, yet I can hear the huge pillars grinding in place. And shortly after that, I started to hear a drum beat. And it was a low beat and then a high beat. So it went bum bum, and then there was a slight pause, bum bum, bum 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 bum. No one was on that mountain.
Welcome back. I'm here with Barry Fitzgerald. Barry, welcome.
Sean, thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's about time. I think I've had your colleague here like 9 times, and I for some reason I couldn't find your email. I had to like search for your email. I could have just asked Steve. I never did though. It was a weird reason. But
yeah, I tend to hide around and swoop under the radar.
Yeah, that's probably, given what you do, it's probably not a bad idea. Okay, so going all the way back, just briefly tell the audience kind of your origin story, but quick biography, and then how you got into all this crazy stuff.
Well, Irish born, of course, and have a heritage of Irish Celts and Viking in there, and Greek as well for the good old storytelling. And I think being part of the island of Ireland, growing up here, we certainly have a connection to the land and the stories in it, and more so the things that still linger around these areas, these liminal spaces that we will touch on and have encounters with on a daily occurrence. And, we're days away from Halloween, of course, and Samhain, what it's called here, it originated here. And you've got Scotland, you've got the Isle of Man, of course, that kept that heritage, but it was born here. And within days, I'm going to be down on the Hill of Ward, where you call the ancestors back. And it is such a really bizarre and crazy experience. It's something truly to experience.
Where is this place?
This is in County Meath. And so it's something that it's so unlike trick or treat and everything else to what Halloween has become now, of course. But it is such an experience. And you've got, the last time I was there were druidic seers on the side of the road who took, say, a button from someone and told them their future. I stayed the hell away from them. The hackles were up in the back of my neck, and I said, nope, don't want any part of that. and I headed on to the fire ceremony. But yeah, it truly is a remarkable experience. So growing up in Ireland, of course, I grew up in a haunted house as well. And people will say, well, how did you really get into this? And I think in itself, my dad has to take some of the blame for that, because he set me down in front of the new colour TV back in the 70s and got me to watch Doctor Who and Star Trek and Blake Seven and everything else. So that, of course, initiated this curiosity within me as to how can all these things happen and things like that. So, and then that later manifested into my teens, in which I had great curiosity and came across one of John Keel's books. What was it called now?
Operation Trojan Horse?
No. It was at Jadoo. And I was absolutely, that was me hooked at that particular stage. And I said, this is what I want to do. And that was it. And Jadoo, of course, was Keel's travel around the world and the experiences and the things that he encountered and researched. And And then into my late teens and into my 20s, of course, then the research was really kicking off. Dipping my toes into the paranormal, per se, and trying to understand that. But as I got older, I got a phone call by the LA crew asking that if I could help them out with a location that they were coming to film in Ireland with the Ghost Hunters crowd. And I said, yeah, where are you going? And they said they're going to Leap Castle, which is meant to be one of Ireland's most haunted locations. And Sean, the guy that owns the place, is a friend of mine. And I went down, and it just so happened one of the cast was afraid to fly, so he couldn't make it to Ireland. And they said to me, look, is there any chance you could go in front of the camera instead of behind him? Yeah, whatever. It turned out to be one of the biggest hits of the show's history. I suppose it was the idea of these ancient, old places that, of course, you don't have so much of in the United States. And then about several months later, I got a phone call from Los Angeles. We're doing an international show. We'd consider being part of the cast, traveling the world, looking at this stuff. And I was, well, yeah, why not?
Twist my arm.
Right. And that was it. And get my passport. I'm away. Bye. And that was that. So, we did travel the world, and I had a remarkable experiences in which I could speak to people from different cultures and different faiths. And during that process, they were telling me their stories, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's the same stuff that we're encountering back on the island.
When the United States and China clash, the world will never be the same, especially when forces beyond reality threaten to intervene. What if the United States went to war with the People's Republic of China? How would these rivals fight for supremacy on land, sea, air, and across the stochastic streams of time? What wonder weapons would be unleashed? What horrors would emerge from the irradiated sludge of the South China Sea? What heroes would rise and forever change the course of history? Tread into the deepest and darkest dimensions of the multiverse, gaze through a kaleidoscope of fractured realities, and bear witness to the disturbing visions of World War III from today's greatest minds in science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Weird World War, China. Available now from Bain Books at bain.com.
And I was saying, but they're calling it a different name. And so that taught me a lesson to not focus per se on the initial identity, the visual identity of the way that this phenomena appears to us. Let's strip that away. Let's look at the way that I identify that we're possibly looking at the same phenomena, just across different cultures and faiths. And I had much better success then in tracking the phenomena. In fact, we tracked it back into ancient prehistory by doing that. And the show came to its end, and I continued on with my work. And I started to slip into the area of ufology, because that's where, I had to broaden my perspective and look at the greater picture, and also see that commonality that I was seeing within the paranormal was now being shared within the ufology. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute, there are things there that are happening there that are same that we're identifying here. And over the course of decades, we've been pigeonholing the phenomenon. And that wasn't serving us well at all, because if anything,
that's a divide and conquer strategy.
Yeah, exactly. So now I'm an avid pusher to destroy those pigeonholes. And let's look at the phenomena as a whole, including the cryptids, Bigfoot, the whole lot. Mm-hmm. Let's look at the common factors here. And what is it telling us? So that's where the research has led me. What are we leading into? And of course, the last publication, The Deception of Gods and Men, it looks and examines the possibilities of what are we actually communicating with? Are there many, or are we looking at one single source? So all of this is developing into what the next book, which should be, I would imagine, will be out by February, March next year, called Born to Serve. And I think that might be my final book. So that'll be book 14, I think. And I think that's enough. Because now I'm a grandfather, and I know it's hard to believe, look at this, but the grey beard's giving it away. And I want to dedicate a lot of my time to my granddaughter. I have a lot of stories to tell her and share, and show her things about the land that kids nowadays don't get an opportunity to see. So I want her to connect with the land that she's born on and what she grows up on. I think it's a good time. It's a good time to have us connect back to where we come from.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
We might get an enforced reconnection to the land pretty soon.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure.
Anyway, I won't go into that. But when you say connection to the land, as a part of the, long since, at least a fraction of the Irish diaspora, right? So, I mean, you could tell from my first and middle name that I'm obviously Irish.
Of course, that was a dead giveaway. I said, "Oh, I know that Irishman." Yes, you are.
Yeah. But I also found there's a bit of Swiss in there, like from my mother's side. I always thought it was, and German. But on the Irish side, I think I've been there once, and we went on like a quick day. It was in Dublin most of the time.
Oh no, you didn't fall for that.
It was a conference, so I had to be in Dublin. I didn't really, but it was fine. But I also got to see the countryside a little bit. So I think mainly County Cork. Went to the usual tourist locations. We went to Blarney Castle, but when I was at Blarney Castle, I didn't go into the castle because there's just too many people.
Yeah.
I kind of just there's an area beside it where there was just nobody. And that's where I went. That's where I felt, I guess, the most home. And are you familiar with like this thing? It's like Lion's Rock or something like that. It's like it's near Blarney. It's just like a little bit in the valley, kind of a valley next to Blarney Castle along a stream. But there's a rock. It looks like a lion.
Okay.
Right. But it's just there's a charm about that area. It's just nice and quiet, get away from the tourists. And even though being a tourist myself, but go ahead.
The rocks, they sing their song and it attracts us.
Yeah. It doesn't attract everybody though.
No.
A lot of them are just go to kiss that Blarney Stone, which I would not recommend. My dad's been to Ireland many times and he's, been to the bars and talked to the locals. And
yeah. You definitely want one of those wipes.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is it about Ireland about the land that is linked to this phenomena?
To understand that, we have to go back into our prehistory and back into a time when we were having people coming in from the likes of Syria and Iraq, and they were part of that particular culture were known as the mound builders. So that was moving. That culture was moving across, and these mound builders were part of the death cult. And I don't mean death cult in a negative way. Everybody dies, but the death cult itself was associated with the mounds, like these mounds on the picture behind me. We have these mounds around where I live, across Ireland. They predate the Great Pyramids of Giza, and we've got access to them 24/7. Now, part of the death cult we see still existed in pre-Christian Scandinavian countries. And because they made it all the way across Europe. And so these people of course, came around the top of Scandinavia and down into Scotland and then down into Ireland and, of course, down to Stonehenge and things like that. And with them, they brought this worship that was dedicated to this aspect of us that detached, it decoupled after death. So several days after we died, then this part of us detached and went back to the rocks and entered the rocks. So we have wall art from Babylon, and I just can't remember the name of them. Racking my brain there to get their name of the culture. It was after that. It was around 800 BC. There was wall art there. The name will may come back to me, but we have part of
the Hittites.
Not the Hittites. No. And we have some of their wall art hanging in a museum in London. And it shows this huge creature And it
Two
has
more. Assyrians?
not Assyrian, no.
Acadians?
Acadians. There you go. Well done.
I knew I'd get it.
So you have the Acadian wall art there that depicts this huge creature, eagle's head on, and there are other depictions as well of different people and animals. But this genius, what has been labeled as this genius, has huge wings behind it, and it's holding a cone, presenting it to the king or the priest on the other side of the tree, and it's also holding a handbag. Now, this handbag depiction... What
is up with these I know exactly what you're talking about. Like these handbags, they're in like Mesoamerica. They're in...
That's right. Yeah. The way across, where the mound builders found themselves, you'll find repetitions of the handbag. Yeah. Now, it wasn't just something that was a fashion icon. There was a purpose behind this. You see, the genius come from the void. They're the gods of the void. They represent, the handbag represents the mound. The mound is a receptacle of the soul. Hence, the gods hold the handbag. Now, on Sardinia, we have a huge chamber there that was uncovered, and it's around 3100 BC. And the outer covering, or the outer doorway of this chamber, giant's chamber, their giant's grave they call it, is this reproduction of the handbag. And we see this right across Europe. So the handbag itself is a representation of the stone mound, in which part of us returns to, and this was a belief system of the death cult, we return to. And not only do we return to it, a lot of the information that we held, that we experienced through life, went with it. Now, according to the pre-Christian Scandinavian belief system, before, if you identify it as, let's say, the soul, before it entered the chamber, it went through a state of metempsychosis. In other words, it changed its form, and it was seen as serpentine, and it entered the stone mounds. Now, within the stone mounds, you also have chambers that are designed in a certain way, that are activated at certain times. So you've got the sun that enters the chamber at a specific date, at a specific time. And the timing is everything when it comes to utilizing these places. When the sun enters the lower aspect of the horizon, it begins to naturally filter. And the atmosphere naturally filters a particular frequency, which is beamed directly into the chamber. That is also the time in which we use, it's like a deep Mongolian chant style affair, which resonates off the chamber. Princeton University came into all of the chambers around Ireland. They'd done some research there, and they discovered that the huge majority of them all resonated at 110 hertz. A very, very low frequency.
Isn't that the European? No, I'm thinking.
This is from New York, the Princeton University that I'm talking about.
Yeah, no, I'm just talking about what frequency do your wall outlets operate at? In the U.S., it's 60 hertz.
Ours is between 50 and 60 hertz, and then you've got that would be our electrical frequencies would be around 50 hertz, between 50 and 60 hertz. But 110 hertz is a very, very low frequency, and so you've got that. But you also have something else. You also have this genius handing over this huge piece of fruit. Now, what the hell is that fruit? What's this meant to do? And I've been working with this for years now, this particular tree species, and discovered pockets of it within Ireland. And this tree species will drop that fruit every 4 years, and it will drop it on the solstice. And having had some of them tested at the solstice period, when you pick these things up off the ground after they've fallen at the solstice, it's almost like picking up an unshielded battery. The inside of it looks like flesh. It's rotting flesh. initially, whenever I seen this fruit, my instinct was screaming at me, stay the hell away from this thing.
What's the name of the fruit?
I'll come to that.
Okay.
And I eventually went back, took the photographs again, and picked it up. And it's whenever I picked it up, where it touched my fingers, the very point at which it touched my skin, it felt like a mild nettle sting. And I brought it to a local laboratory, and they said, well, it's this particular chemical that's being released, serotonin, and it's affecting the skin. And I said, no, it's not that. Because I also brought 2 samples in a plastic bag to a guy who draws particular chemicals and minerals from various different plants, a herbalist. And I brought it to him to say, okay, I want you to test this to see what's going on. The feeling that this fruit presents when it's in your presence is like nothing else. I've never, ever experienced this anywhere else. Because even within the plastic bag, the moment you pick it up, the hair on your arm lifts up and it travels right up your arm. This is not serotonin. This is not a chemical that's leaching out of the plastic bags that they're in. Because clearly there was no connection. There's something else that's going on with this.
Does the thing emit like a electric field or a magnetic field?
That's what we believe, yes, it is. But it's only for a 7-day period. So 7 days leading up to the solstice and leading out of the solstice. And we understand that the solstice is a 7-day period. It's not just the 21st of June. It's a 7-day period. And this would tie in with the fruit. So not only do you consume part of this particular plant, which is being handed over by the gods for the solstice within the chambers, which are associated with the death cult. But there's one thing that the herbalist had happened to mention. He said the gods don't want to speak to someone who's dumb. And when you consume this, it raises, his words were, it raises your conscious levels, it raises your circulatory system. Everything is increased at that particular point. Now, he made a tincture out of this particular fruit at that period. And I said, oh, no, I'm interested to, because I put so much work into it. You know, I was right at the very edge. He said, okay, let's see what this is doing. And I said, okay. And he gave me a spoon. And I put it into the tincture and I lifted it out to look at it. And it all poured out. Now, the spoon, I hadn't the spoon upside down. The spoon was put in the proper way. I lifted it out and the spoon's empty. It wouldn't stay in the spoon. I said, there's something, I don't know what you're washing your spoons in, but it's not allowing me to lift this stuff out.
It's a magnetic field, right?
We tried multiple spoons and it would not stay in the spoon. It stayed with the liquid. And I was saying, this is absolutely tremendous. But anyhow, this particular tree is associated with these mounds. The mounds are associated with the doorways that open between the void and our world. So naturally, from the death cults, you would have had the person who would have been the go-between, your oracle, which naturally at the very beginning would have been feminine. So you had the female oracle that sat in this chamber of people who were creating this vibration as the sunlight was beaming in, and this fruit was being consumed as well. Now, you've got all this going on at that particular moment in time. The culmination of the door opening is also in correlation with what comes through, which was always identified as a giant serpent. So the knowledge that was being passed through from the void was passed by this serpent. Now, roll along thousands of years to what we have today, what we recognize today. We see Eve and this aspect of the serpent being alienated. So it's the old religion being railroaded and the new religion, of course, presenting its own way. But that information didn't disappear, because we still see it being practiced today, because that particular subchamber, if you like, of these ancient passage chambers, was replicated. And within the Vatican, of course, we've got one of the hugest resonance chambers in the world, which points east. And you've got this huge monolith in St. Peter's Square, which is also something. Ob was an ancient serpent god. And you've got this huge pinnacle, needle standing in the middle of St. Peter's Square from Egypt. And at a house or a building which can resonate very effectively to this particular thing that our ancients were doing. And so it's amazing how it has moved through history and how aspects of that certainly have replicated themselves. And so that, I have to say, was where our connections definitely were coming from, because pre-then it gets very, very cloudy before who was on the land and things like that. Our history books have continually been pushing back over the past decade, because initially we were told, it was 10,000 BC, the ice started retracting, and then people started appearing. Then we started finding information. Well, wait a minute, take that old history book, rub that out, and we got to go back to 14,000 BC. Now we got to go back to 33,000 BC. And so we're continually relaying history whenever we get to learn about it. But who the people were, we just simply do not know. What we do know is, and there's some controversial DNA analysis that was done on remains that were discovered in Northern Ireland. That's how we know where the people were coming from that were associated with the mound builders. But we also seen that there was this eradication within the DNA analysis. Suddenly there was a time period that just simply vanished. And it looks like this third party that came in at a particular time period, which we can identify within the mythology as the time the Tuatha De Danann arrived, which were recognized, of course, within the great annals as being the gods and everything else. What they don't talk about is that they wiped out the male lineage of the Neolithic. So that was severe. And that's exceptionally controversial. It's very, very controversial DNA data which is coming out, and it's got people worried about this and that, and who's going to say this and who's going to say that. But that's all I can talk about is the data.
Didn't something similar happen? I heard this anecdotally, so I haven't checked up on it, so forgive me if it's not accurate. But I've heard something similar about like Roman bloodlines in Britain. Like after the Romans were ejected, those bloodlines just disappeared.
Oh, I could well believe it. Yeah, absolutely. Revenge for the Druids.
Yeah, so it's like there's something about the both isles that, something dark in that sense.
Oh, it was. Now we wouldn't allow, of course, and we didn't allow the Romans into Ireland because they have a fashion faux pas of wearing socks with sandals. We said, "Oh hell no, you're not getting in with that."
That's worth stopping them. Do you talk about the snake? Sorry, I'm having lots of random thoughts, so just redirect me if
that's all right.
So St. Patrick, right? "Quote unquote," drove the snakes out of Ireland.
Oh yeah, good old St. Patrick. Yeah.
Is that just a coincidence, or does that have something to do? That story have something to do with this snake association?
Well, you see, what we have is this belief system today in which we see St. Patrick walking to the cliffs of Moher or somewhere like that in the West Coast, and all the snakes jumping off into the ocean. That's not what happened, because St. Patrick had his confrontation in the Forest of Light, which is in County Tyrone. And that's in the heart of Northern Ireland. And there you have the Cliff of the Demons. St. Patrick banished the serpents back into the rocks. And this is a place where it's very active, even today. There's still a lot of weirdness that goes along around this particular place. I do know, and I have spoken to a guy that was taken while he was walking his dog through that location. 4 days later, he appeared in the middle of the police search party that were looking for him with his dog. Abduction, UFO sightings, cryptids, It's all seen around this particular area.
Was he like any worse for wear, or was he?
He wasn't any worse for wear. But whenever his story was picked up by the press, they absolutely destroyed him and destroyed his life and his career. And as a respect to him, I'll not go into that any further in that detail. But he had an experience there, and many others have had their experiences there. And it is a very, very different place. It's a forest when you walk into it. It is a deep valley as well. It feels as if you're walking into a place which is out of time. It's not synced properly. It's not like where you walked from the edge of the road down into it. It feels different. So, yeah, and there are many places like that right around the planet. And this is something that I've been working with now for the past 10, 15 years, using technology to identify these particular areas. Because for a long time within the world of the paranormal and things like that, we've been really shooting into the dark, trying to find these locations, and we're saying, well, maybe we'll try over here this particular night because who knows? No, now we use satellite data, and we can pretty much pinpoint the areas that we want to go into. And there are targeted areas. From what we see, there are more areas, smaller pockets of areas within the northern hemisphere than what we see in the southern hemisphere. Southern hemisphere has huge, huge swathes of areas where the real phenomena appears. And, I should point out, not everything that goes bump in the night is a ghost. Not everything that flashes in the night sky is a UFO. But there are places that you can go to that are being used by this phenomenon. And many times it is places that we are not welcome in.
Now, really quick question, going back, what was the name of the fruit?
I just call it a cone. Now, the species of tree, it's a fir species. I can't give you, because I can't remember it offhand, the scientific name for it, but it is a species of fir, and every 4 years it will drop that fruit. So when you find a pocket here in Ireland, you go, oh, great, it's going to drop the fruit on the solstice. That's okay. You can't use that next year or the next 3 years. You've got to find a new batch, and that can be a pain in the backside.
Are these things synced, so they all drop once every 4 years, or is it just when it was planted? It just
when it was planted. Yeah.
What does it taste like?
Surprisingly citric.
Mm-hmm.
Not like anything that I had ever thought it was going to be. You've got some of the likes of sap from particular trees and stuff like that can be very, very sweet. That's kind of what I was expecting, that type of thing, but not at all. Not at all.
When you ate it, did you find any, like you said, your senses?
I took it in a tea, and it turned the tea surprisingly. This is perfect. My little stop notes. That color, it turned the water that particular pink, and tastes surprisingly citric. And I have to say that after 15 minutes of drinking the tea, you realize where you are. Like, you're sitting in that black chair there. I'm sitting on my chair. I know exactly where I am. But after 15 minutes, suddenly you're half in, half out. It's a very unusual sensation. And my wife, she's very tuned into me. I can't get away with nothing because she seems to get into my head. So, but she had been to the shops, and I thought, oh, that would be a good time to try the tea. So the time she came back, she opened the sliding doors, and she walked in. She knew something's different. And she came in quietly, and she looked at me and she said, what's wrong? And she knew something was up as I was half in, half out. It was the weirdest sensation. But the passage chambers themselves, again, there's a clue. Passageway to where exactly? I was up one of the mountains on the solstice, and I had entered the chamber. Now, initially what I wanted to do was to film the sun entering the chamber and moving around, because what tends to happen on the 21st of June, you have all these people who come in from all over the country, and they want to get inside the chamber for this experience, their way of connecting back. And if you can't get in, because there's only enough space for 6 or 7 people at most, if you can't get in, then people will stand in front of the chamber and block the sun. Then there's fisticuffs. People start fighting each other. It's all...
Well, they do it deliberately?
They do it deliberately, yeah, to ruin someone else's time. So all of this is happening on the one day. The solstice is a 7-day period. So I go up there 2 days later. There's no one there. So I have the entire mountain to myself in these chambers. And I set in the recorder and I started recording the sunlight. Now, before I left, I actually put in an audio recorder. Not sure why. I just did it and left it on the stone and left. And I went to the top chamber because I wanted to check the orientation of the top chamber as well. So that was a good 400 or 500 meters away. I was on the mountain myself. The sun was starting to set and I left the camera to do its thing. When it was all over, I came down, grabbed all the gear, and I left. And I brought it back, started to work on the computer on the image because I was making a video at the time. And the sun entered the chamber and started passing around whenever I sped it up. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But I thought, the audio. What I didn't expect was on the audio, I could clearly hear the sounds of the pillars turning. The stone pillars that held up the roof were grinding in place. Now, I can tell you this. I was looking at the video. Nothing moved in that chamber, yet I can hear the huge pillars grinding in place. And shortly after that, I started to hear a drum beat. And it was a low beat and then a high beat. So it went boom, boom, and then there was a slight pause, boom, 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 boom. No one was on that mountain. I certainly was not playing a drum. But something opened in that chamber at that time. And also it should be noted that the old deities that were worshipped during the time of the death cults attracted their gods by the sound of their heartbeat using drums. And also, for a long time, I thought that was the beat, the boom, 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 boom. I thought it was all the same thing. It's actually not the case. The higher beat, quite possibly, was an echo. And the amount of time it took for that to come back allowed me to understand that suddenly the chamber had gone from 6 feet to 300 feet. So that changed everything of what these chambers were, what they were communicating with.
When you say from 6 feet to 300 feet, do you mean deep? Do you mean
long? As in long. The length of this chamber, something somewhere opened up to allow the reflection of that beat to bounce back. And in the time period that bounced back, we were able to determine that's 300 feet. And it absolutely just blew my mind whenever I started piecing this together. And I subsequently I was writing a story on the Island of the Dead, also here in Ireland. And the Island of the Dead is not what it's actually called. It's called Saints Island. And it's up in Lough Derg in County Donegal. But ironically, we called it the Island of the Dead, not understanding that this is part of the old death cult. They brought them to these places, these islands. The dead were brought to these places where this aspect decoupled and entered the stone. And when we went there, we understood that there was historical references and things like that from the Royal Irish Society and things like that talked about that this place was a place of oracle that was completely underestimated. And people were coming from medieval Europe and everything to experience life in this place, this experience that they would have that would purge them from sin. And I thought, yeah. We hear all these stories in Ireland and go, yeah, whatever. And we ended up going and we rode across the island. We got permission from the church, but it just got too dark for us to row back. It's a very dangerous lake to be in. With a motorboat, you just simply wouldn't do it. And we ended up spending the night on the island. And when the sun started to set, that's whenever we realized these stories were true, because the sensation of that island completely changed. I have to say, back in the medieval period, that they had a plan of this, a map of this island, and it was split in two. And the foliage on the island denoted that the high ferns were associated with the place of the angels, the good place. And that's where you found the church. And then you had this other place with the high grass. And that was known as the place of the demons. And this is where the pits were found. It's the only place in the blasted island that you can camp, because the shrubbery naturally stays down in the pits. It's about that size. It's the growth of the plants within those pits have stayed the same throughout hundreds of years. The whole island has remained the same. The vegetation has remained the same lines and everything. I think, how is this even possible? And so we ended up, again, we stayed. The only place that we could camp out was the clearing within the pits. And boy, oh boy, I had an experience in that, in which I said to Cormac, my co-author, and he was staying in the other pit further down the hill. The next morning, I said to him, I ever experience that again, I'm done. I'm retiring. I want nothing to do with that, because it scared the absolute bejesus out of me.
Well, what happened?
The dog, even my dog, Maximilian, he's a huge, huge dog, a cross between a Danish Shepherd and a Japanese Akita. He went everywhere with me. He was the one who found cave systems whenever I was walking past them. There must be a smell or something he was picking up on, but he was always in for the adventure. And during the night, I'm an avid stargazer. I would be out there looking for the aurora borealis or planets or whatever the case may be. I'm always avidly looking at stars. That night, I did not go out. Something, my instinct kept me within the tent, and I said, okay, I'm staying here. And I lay down. Max buried his head underneath the sleeping bag. At that point, I knew, okay, he's picking up on something that I haven't detected yet. Within 5 minutes, you felt this wash run through the tent. It started at the head and run down to the feet. It was just like a wave after wave. And if you were to put a sound, it would be that created this air of anxiety and unease. And that particular night, that's what I wasn't resting properly at all. And that particular night, I had this, I suppose you would call it, a very vivid dream in which I saw the church on the island and the pit. And it was the ruination of this old stone mound. And within the stone mound, there was another pit downward. But there was something on the edge of the pit that was creating a problem. And I went down to it, and even though I could hear the serpents, I could clearly hear them. And it was terrifying me that I could hear this den of serpents that was there. It was what was around this hole that made me stop and pause, and I pulled it out, and it was iron trinkets from the Celtic period. And I understood at that particular point why this place was so active, because the Celts were utilizing it and forced the door open. When you get the door open, you can keep it open with iron. And that's why this place essentially had malfunctioned, because of the iron that the Celts had been using. And it allowed the church to come in. The church took over. They tried to control it, couldn't control it. They disassembled the place and replicated it on another island on the same lake, in which you can go today for a swipe of a credit card. You can go on an adventure around the pits, and they even had a cave in there until Halloween of 1600 or something again. They replicated a cave in which you went into. Now, this cave we found on the other island, on Saints Island. It was a former passage chamber, and it had been destroyed. We were standing on top of this passage chamber, and I use a particular piece of equipment there. It's called a time differential meter. And we would run the sensor on a 100-foot line back to the main computer, and it will let us know if there's a difference between the signal and the sensor itself. It was the first time ever that I've been able to record on video a differential sitting on top of this passage chamber of time. And that in itself, we realized we're sitting on this doorway, which is what Project Doorway was. It was one of those things that was born from, to try and weed out these particular areas where the phenomenon was leaking onto the surface and back to. And so it was a remarkable experience. Horrifying, I have to say, absolutely horrifying, because they often talked about these experiences that people would have. And I suppose spiritually, if you want to go down that path, what happens in the spirit world can be much more intense. The feelings of love and everything else can be so overwhelming, but so can fear. That can be very, and I felt that particular night I stayed in that island. I have not stayed on that island again. I have been back, and I was back in daylight. And that's whenever we used the time differential meter and we understood, okay, we found it. We know what it is. We know where it is. But I have not been back. Would I go back? I prefer not to. And yeah, so it was an interesting experience.
In some of these locations, in these mounds, is there any geologic, are there any certain geologic features like quartz or anything like that that's in these areas?
No. It's associated with rocks. That's for sure, but all different types of rocks. And the phenomena itself, as I said, can present itself in many different forms. And people will ask me, well, what type of equipment are you using to try and understand this? And to be honest, the best piece of equipment that we have is us. It's our instinct. It's how we connect back to this. And, you'd happen to say about being in the military before, and it was interesting. I felt it so welcoming to hear of soldiers that were in Scotland who were serving out in the Middle East. They were going through their training, and their commanding officer had said, if we're going out on this particular road, we're doing this security thing. If there is anything while we're driving that you feel is not quite right, get us to stop and we'll talk through it. And he said that saved their lives, because they were able to talk through this feeling, this sense of there's something not quite right. And they worked through that, and it saved them, because there was one example. There was another troop had passed by, and they were hit by the bomb at the side of the road, and that killed them. So, but it was great to hear that at certain levels we're trying to connect back to this instinct, this voice of discernment that we all possess. But unfortunately, we live in a society as well in which that gift of discernment is being quashed by the food that we eat, by what we drink, can also affect how we connect with this and how it works with that.
All right. I think now is probably about as good a time as any to finish this episode. But last question here. Anything for the audience that you want to leave for final words?
Yes. There's a new book coming out next year. It's called Born to Serve. That is a vital read. Because not only do we pinpoint where geographically this phenomena is coming from, it's what it is. So that's very important. It will be the last book that I bring out. All
right, Barry. It was an absolute pleasure, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
I mean, like literally in the next episode we'll talk, because there's tons of stuff still to talk about. So thank you.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support, because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you could get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of a expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's two options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site. And there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much and keep watching. I really appreciate it.